This is a story about a Cuban-American mechanic on Calle Ocho in Little Havana, Miami, who restored Lamborghinis for 22 years before life forced him to start over in the converted 1958 Esso station his father had owned since the year Lyndon Johnson was president. It is a story about a father from Brooklyn who built a $1.2 billion real estate empire and decided that one small auto garage on Calle Ocho was the only thing standing between him and another $480 million. It is a story about a Lamborghini Miura SVJ that was supposed to have been one of 5 built in 1971. It was not. It was, as we will discover, something else entirely. Something that had been hidden in a private Italian collection for 53 years, and then sold for $4.2 million at a Sotheby's RM auction in Monterey, California, in the summer of 2025. To a man who believed he could buy authentication, the way he had bought a county commissioner and an admissions committee member. It is a story about an archive of Polaroid photographs and handwritten notes that a Cuban exile police detective named Hernán Reyes had kept in a locked cabinet behind his desk for 30 years for reasons no one, including his own son, had fully understood. And it is a story about a mother-in-law who had testified against the wrong man in 2018, and who would, 9 years later, knock on his garage door on a Saturday morning with nowhere else to go. This story takes place in Little Havana, Miami, between November of 2026 and September of 2027. It begins on a Friday morning in November in a converted gas station 2 blocks south of Calle Ocho, with the smell of fresh Cuban coffee and the sound of a brand-new Rolls-Royce Cullinan pulling into a parking lot that had not received a luxury vehicle since the previous owner died in 2019. Marcus Reyes had been the headmaster technician at Lamborghini Miami for 22 years before. Life forced him to walk away, and he had been the sole owner of Reyes Restoration on the corner of Southwest 8th Street and 24th Avenue in Little Havana for 8 years and 7 months after that. The transition between those 2 lives had cost him his benefits, his profit sharing, his place in the technical training rotation. Lamborghini Sant'Agata Bolognese ran for senior North American technicians every other September, his standing in the Coral Gables exotic car collector community, and approximately $58,000 per year in income that the small, classic restoration business on Calle Ocho could not, no matter how hard he worked, fully replace. What it had not cost him was his son. Diego Reyes was 16 years old. He had been accepted to Florida International University on the early action deadline of December 15, 2026, a notification Marcus and Diego both expected on December 18th, on a partial scholarship that would pay $80,000 across 4 years, and that would make Diego, when he matriculated in August of 2027, the first member of the Reyes family in 3 generations to attend an American university on his own academic merit, rather than through the immigration assistance programs that had carried Marcus's father to Miami in 1962. Diego had inherited his mother's dark eyes and his grandmother's Cuban patience, and the particular tilt of the head with which his father, when concentrating on a difficult diagnostic problem, leaned slightly to the left to favor his good ear over his bad one. He did not know, on the morning of November 14, 2026, that his father's hearing was beginning to deteriorate. Marcus had not told him. Marcus had not told anyone. Esperanza Reyes had been a registered nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital for 14 years before she had injured her lower back in May of 2016, lifting a patient who had slipped from a bedside commode and fallen against the wall of his room on the 3rd floor of the cardiac care unit. The injury had progressed, despite 3 surgeries and 18 months of physical therapy, into a chronic pain condition that had been managed after the failure of conservative treatment options with prescription opioid medications. Esperanza had died on a Wednesday morning in May of 2018, at the age of 39, of an accidental overdose of medications that had been prescribed for her by 3 different physicians at 3 different practices in Greater Miami, none of whom had been aware, until after her death, of the prescriptions written by the others. Diego had been 8 years old. He had come home from his 3rd grade class at Auburndale Elementary School at 3:47 in the afternoon. He had found his mother. He had not, in the 8 years and 6 months since that afternoon, ever spoken about it. Marcus had not asked. Marcus's father, Hernán Reyes, had come to Miami in 1962 as part of Operation Pedro Pan, the United States government program that had transported approximately 14,000 unaccompanied Cuban children to the United States between 1960 and 1962, in advance of the Cuban government's stated intention to assume custody of all children of opposition families. Hernán had been 13 years old. He had served as a detective with the Miami-Dade Police Department for 30 years, from 1965 through 1995. He had restored classic Italian sports cars as a hobby for 54 years, from his arrival in Miami until his death of a sudden cardiac event at his small kitchen table on Coral Way on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2019 at the age of 70. He had been, by reputation, the best Lamborghini Miura restorer in the United States south of Atlanta between approximately 1985 and 2010. He had restored, by Marcus's reckoning, somewhere between 8 and 10 Miuras during that 25-year period, including the Miura P400 owned by an Italian-American collector in Coral Gables named Roberto Castellotti, which Hernán had restored from severe flood damage in the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Hernán had kept records, Polaroid photographs, handwritten notes, a locked cabinet behind the desk in the back office of Reyes Restoration, which Marcus had inherited along with the building, and which he had not, in 7 years and 1 month, fully catalogued. Tia Carmen Reyes, Marcus's 80-year-old aunt, lived in a small apartment 4 blocks east of the garage. She had emigrated from Cuba with Hernán in 1962. She had never married. She came to Marcus's small house on Coral Way on Sunday afternoons with a large ceramic pot of rapa vieja that Diego had been eating since he was old enough to chew, and she did not speak about Esperanza because there were certain absences that did not require words after a certain number of years. Reyes Restoration was a converted 1958 Esso service station that Hernán had purchased in 1971 with the down payment from his Miami-Dade Police Department signing bonus. It sat between a small Cuban bakery called Pasteleria Versailles and a Domino Park on Calle Ocho. The shop specialized in Italian classics, Ferrari and Lamborghini and Maserati and Alfa Romeo, from the 1965 through 1995 production years, for collectors who had heard through the small network of Cuban-American mechanics in Greater Miami that Marcus Reyes would diagnose anything they brought him, would charge fair rates, and would tell them the truth even when Lamborghini Miami or any of the South Florida auction houses would not. Marcus had one apprentice. His name was Miguel Santos. He was 21 years old, Cuban-American by way of his father from Marianao and his mother from Camagüey, and a graduate of the Miami-Dade College Automotive Service Technology program. He earned $26 an hour, which was $4 more than Marcus could comfortably afford to pay, and which Marcus paid anyway because Miguel had ambitions to design Italian sports cars in Maranello someday, and Marcus did not. He had decided in the 2nd month of Miguel's employment, intend to be the man who told him that ambitions of that scale were beyond the reach of a kid from Hialeah whose mother cleaned houses in Coral Gables. On the morning of November 14, 2026, Marcus opened the garage at 6:30 and did 3 things he had done every morning for 8 years and 7 months. He started the small Cuban espresso machine on the counter behind the register, because instant coffee was, in his view, a personal failure of character. He turned on the overhead halogens in Bay 1, which were the only thing keeping the shop bright enough for proper diagnostic work during a Miami November. And he lit a small votive candle in front of the framed photograph of Esperanza Reyes that hung on the wall behind the register beside Diego's framed a few notification of pending early action review. He poured the espresso into a small ceramic cortadito cup, sat at the desk in the back office, and opened the appointment book. There was one appointment that day. It was scheduled for 10 in the morning. The customer name was listed as V. Castellano. The vehicle was listed as a 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ. The reason for visit was listed as authentication. Marcus had not authenticated a classic Lamborghini for a private collector in 8 years and 3 months. He sat at the desk for a long time. He drank his espresso. He waited for Miguel to arrive at 7. He did not yet know that Vincent Castellano, the 68-year-old Brooklyn-born real estate developer who had built Castellano Properties into a $1.2 billion South Florida portfolio over 41 years, would arrive at the garage in 3.5 hours in a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan, accompanied by his senior attorney and 2 corporate publicists from a Miami-based public relations firm, and would carry, on the enclosed transport trailer behind him, a Bianco Polo Park 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ that was, in addition to many other things, not actually a 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ. He only knew that the espresso was hot, the votive candle was burning, and Diego would be at the small kitchen table on Coral Way in 23 minutes, eating a slice of guava and cheese pastelito, reading a paperback copy of Oscar Higuelos's The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love that Marcus had given him for his 16th birthday in September. Vincent Castellano arrived at Reyes Restoration at 10:04 in the morning in a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan with Florida plates. He was followed by a charcoal gray BMW X7 containing his senior attorney Marcus Pemberton, no relation to the Cromwell Performance Group counsel from the previous winter's Porsche gay matter, though Marcus Reyes would not have known about that case yet, and two corporate publicists from a Brickell-based public relations firm called Halcyon Group Miami. Behind both vehicles, on a single-axle enclosed transport trailer pulled by a Ford F-450 Super Duty in Castellano Properties navy and gold, sat a Bianco Polo Park Lamborghini Miura that Marcus had not previously seen in person, but which he recognized within 45 seconds of seeing it as a vehicle whose paperwork would not survive the morning. Vincent walked into the office at 10:07 wearing a charcoal Brioni suit, an open-collared white dress shirt, and a pair of brown crocodile John Lobb loafers that were, as he would learn from Diego that evening, when his son recognized them in a Wall Street Journal-style supplement Diego had been reading at the kitchen table. $4,800 retail. He was 68 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 240 pounds, with the kind of late-period New York Italian-American physique that suggested both serious gym membership and serious appetite. He had been the chief executive officer of Castellano Properties for 41 years, having taken the company from his father Salvatore in 1985 after Salvatore's federal indictment on charges relating to a Brooklyn waterfront racketeering matter that had never gone to trial because Salvatore had died of a cardiac event during pretrial detention. Vincent had inherited approximately $40 million from his father in 1985. He had, over the subsequent 41 years, parlayed that inheritance into a $1.2 billion South Florida commercial real estate portfolio that included, as of November of 2026, 18 historic buildings in Little Havana that he intended to demolish in the spring of 2027 for a $480 million luxury condominium project called Calle Ocho Tower. One of the 18 buildings was the Cuban bakery Pasteleria Versailles. One of the 18 buildings was the converted Esso service station that housed Reyes Restoration. The Miami-Dade County Historic Preservation Board was scheduled to vote on the project's required variance on December 15, 2026. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. "Mr. Reyes," he said. "Thank you for taking the appointment." Marcus set down his second cortadito of the morning. Diego was sitting in the corner of the office on a small wooden bench that Hernán Reyes had built for Marcus when Marcus was 10 years old, reading the Oscar Higuelos paperback. He did not look up. Diego had inherited from his grandfather the discipline of not looking up when people one did not wish to engage with entered a room. Miguel was in Bay 2, performing a torque check on the rear differential bolts of a 1995 Ferrari F50 that a Coral Gables collector had brought in for pre-delivery inspection before a private sale to a buyer in Sao Paulo. He had heard the Rolls-Royce arrive. He had stopped working. He was now standing very still beside the lift, holding a torque wrench, watching the office through the open bay door. Marcus looked at Vincent Castellano and did not stand up. "Mr. Castellano, please sit down." Vincent sat. Marcus Pemberton remained standing near the doorway with a leather portfolio. The two Halcyon publicists remained behind Pemberton with iPads. The Rolls-Royce remained idling in the parking lot, attended by a driver in a black suit. "Mr. Reyes, I am here because I require, by the close of business this Friday, a professional authentication letter for a 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ that I purchased at the Sotheby's RM Monterey auction in August of last year for $4.2 million. The vehicle is currently the subject of a pending private sale to a buyer in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for $7.5 million. The buyer requires independent third-party authentication. Sotheby's RM has declined to re-authenticate the vehicle on procedural grounds. Lamborghini USA has declined on what I understand to be policy grounds. 3 independent classic Lamborghini authenticators based in the United States have declined for reasons that have not been adequately explained to me. You were recommended by a mutual acquaintance in the Coral Gables exotic car community. I am prepared to compensate you $45,000 in cash for the authentication. The buyer in Riyadh closes the wire transfer on December 18th. I would like the letter signed by December 15th. He paused. There are, as you may have heard, certain matters before the Miami-Dade Historic Preservation Board on December 15th as well. Matters that affect the variance on the building you are currently sitting in. I am told the variance is unlikely to be granted by the board as currently constituted. But variances can be requested again in subsequent quarters, and Castellano Properties has on a number of occasions withdrawn requests for variances when local commercial circumstances suggested that withdrawal would be preferable to the board members' attention to specific tenancies. Your son has, I understand, applied to Florida International University. My nephew Joey Castellano sits on the FU Undergraduate Admissions Committee. He has been, in the past, very interested in supporting the applications of local Cuban-American students whose families have demonstrated cooperative relationships with the regional business community. Mr. Reyes, you and I both know how Miami works. $45,000 buys 6 months of garage rent. Your son's future buys forever. I am paying you for a signature, not for an opinion. Please understand the difference. Marcus looked at Diego, who was now looking up from the Hijuelos paperback. Diego's expression was the expression Esperanza had worn on the night of May 8, 2016, when Marcus had told her, at the kitchen table on Coral Way, that he had agreed to take an additional 15% commission cut on his next 2 performance reviews at Lamborghini Miami in exchange for management's commitment not to terminate a fellow Cuban-American technician whose probation was scheduled for the following Monday. It was the look of a child who was preparing to be disappointed by the man he had been raised to believe would never disappoint him. Marcus turned back to Vincent Castellano. He did not respond to the offer. Mr. Castellano, may I see the vehicle, please? Vincent nodded once. Marcus Pemberton handed Marcus the key. Marcus stood up. He walked through Bay 1 past Miguel, who he did not acknowledge, and out into the November sun. He spent 11 minutes walking around the trailer before he asked the driver to unload it. Marcus Reyes began the inspection at 10:37 in the morning and finished at 1:52 in the afternoon. The work took 3 hours and 15 minutes. Vincent Castellano remained in the air-conditioned office for the entire duration. Marcus Pemberton stood beside him, holding the leather portfolio, taking handwritten notes on a yellow legal pad. The 2 halcyon publicists remained near the doorway. Diego sat on the small wooden bench, reading the Hijuelos paperback, and then, at approximately 11:30, set the paperback down and walked into Bay 1 and stood approximately 10 feet away from his father, watching him work. Marcus did not ask him to leave. Miguel, who had finished the Ferrari F50 torque check, quietly took up a position in Bay 3 where he could see Marcus work without appearing to watch. Marcus's first action was to perform a full visual inspection of the vehicle's exterior, undercarriage, and engine compartment, using a small LED headlamp and a magnifying loupe that he had purchased from a Santa Gata Bolognese factory parts supplier in 2008. During the 3-month Lamborghini Polo Storico Certified Master Technician training program he had completed at the factory. The visual inspection took 51 minutes. He did not speak during the inspection. He took 23 photographs with his cell phone. He made no notes. His second action was to retrieve from the locked cabinet behind the desk in the back office a small cardboard archive box labeled Miura P400 SSV SVJ, 1968-1973 in his father's handwriting. The box contained 277 Polaroid photographs, 58 pages of handwritten technical notes, and a single spiral-bound notebook in which Hernán Reyes had documented every Lamborghini Miura he had restored between 1985 and 2010. The notebook contained entries for 9 Miuras. 4 were Miura P400s, 3 were Miura S models, 2 were Miura SVs. None were Miura SVJs because Hernán had, in his own words written in pencil on the first page of the notebook in March of 1985, declined to work on Miura SVJ models because he believed the rarity of the production run, 5 vehicles, made restoration ethically complex in ways he did not. As a Cuban exile police detective working on classic Italian cars in his garage on weekends, feel qualified to navigate. The notebook contained, on pages 41 through 47, a detailed photographic and written reference for the chassis stamping patterns used at the Santa Gata Bolognese factory during the Miura production years 1968 through 1973. The reference included specifications for stamping depth, 0.7 millimeters for P400 production, 0.9 millimeters for SVJ production. Serif characteristics. Santa Gata factory used a proprietary modified Helvetica serif during the 1970 and 1971 production years. and authentication marks, small foundry stamps adjacent to the chassis number that varied by month of production, and that had been removed from official Lamborghini factory documentation in 1994 for reasons that had never been publicly explained. Marcus carried the archive box into Bay 1. He set it on a small workbench beside the engine compartment of the Castellano Miura. He opened the notebook to page 43. He compared the chassis stamping on the Castellano vehicle to the reference photograph in Hernán's notebook. The chassis stamping on the Castellano vehicle had a depth of approximately 1.2 millimeters, which was inconsistent with both P400 and SVJ specifications. The depth was consistent, however, with a re-stamping that had been performed over an original P400 chassis number, with the original digits ground down and replaced with new digits stamped at a deeper depth to ensure the original markings did not show through. The serif characteristics did not match Santa Agata factory stamping for any year. The serif was, Marcus understood, a modern serif. It was consistent with a stamping that had been performed using commercial die-cut equipment available to specialty restoration shops in Europe between approximately 1995 and 2005. The foundry stamps adjacent to the chassis number had been removed entirely. Marcus's third action was to retrieve from the small toolbox he kept beside the workbench a portable X-ray fluorescent spectrometer manufactured by Thermo Fisher Scientific. The unit was a Niton XL5+. It had been purchased used from a Lamborghini Miami inventory liquidation in 2020 for $11,000. He had calibrated it himself using certified titanium and aluminum reference samples that he had retained from his Lamborghini Miami years. He took 4 spectrometer readings on the chassis stamping area. He took confirmatory readings on the engine block casting marks. He took confirmatory readings on 3 locations on the body panels. He set the spectrometer on the workbench. He walked back into the office. Diego followed him. Marcus sat down at the desk. He picked up his espresso, which was now cold. He took a small sip. He looked at Vincent Castellano. Mr. Castellano, the vehicle you purchased at Sotheby's RM Monterey in August of last year for $4.2 million is not a 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ. It is a 1969 Lamborghini Miura P400. Retail value approximately $850,000, which has been modified by a Swiss workshop operating between approximately 1995 and 2000 to resemble a Miura SVJ. The chassis number has been ground down and re-stamped using commercial die-cut equipment. The engine identification plate has been replaced. The body has been resprayed 3 times. The original color was Verde Miura. The current color is Bianco Polo Park. There is a layer of giallo fly between them, dated by paint composition analysis to approximately 1995. The Swiss workshop responsible for this counterfeit was identified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2018 as part of a network that produced approximately 14 counterfeit Italian classic sports cars between 1993 and 2004. 2 of the 14 have been recovered. This vehicle is the third. He paused. He looked at Diego. He looked back at Vincent. You did not buy a Miura SVJ, Mr. Castellano. You bought a 40-year-old Cuban exile police detective's most carefully documented refusal. 46 words. Approximately 24 seconds. Calm, devastating. Vincent Castellano did not respond for several seconds. Marcus Pemberton's pen had stopped moving on the yellow legal pad. The 2 halcyon publicists had stopped looking at their iPads. Diego had moved to a position directly behind Marcus where he could see Vincent's face, but where Vincent could not, without turning, see Diego's. Vincent spoke. Mr. Reyes, I am prepared to increase the authentication compensation to $75,000. The vehicle is not a Miura SVJ, Mr. Castellano. $100,000. It is a counterfeit, Mr. Castellano. I am unable to authenticate a counterfeit, Mr. Reyes. Your son's college application, my son's college application, will be reviewed by Florida International University on the basis of his academic record, his test scores, and the application materials he submitted on October 8th of this year. If your nephew Joey Castellano interferes with that process in any way, my attorney will, on December 19th, file a complaint with the Florida Commission on Ethics, the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, and the Miami Herald. I have spoken to my attorney about this in advance. I had assumed when you booked the appointment under your surname only that this conversation was a possibility. Mr. Reyes and the building, Mr. Castellano. The variance vote on December 15th. I am aware of it. I have, since June of this year, been collecting documentation of Castellano Properties' acquisitions of Little Havana historic structures through shell entities, and I have shared that documentation with 3 reporters at El Nuevo Herald and 1 at the Miami Herald. The variance, as you correctly observed, is unlikely to be granted. It is unlikely to be granted whether or not I sign the authentication letter you have requested. The variance, in other words, is not a lever you currently possess. It is a circumstance you are attempting to leverage. There is a difference. He paused. I have been preparing for the conversation we are having for 9 years, Mr. Castellano. I am not unprepared. Vincent Castellano stood up slowly. Marcus Pemberton closed the leather portfolio. The 2 halcyon publicists looked at each other. Vincent walked to the office doorway. He stopped. He turned back. Mr. Reyes, the Saudi buyer wires the funds on December 18th regardless of authentication. He does not. The Saudi buyer requires independent third-party authentication. You said so yourself. 11 minutes after you walked into my office, he will not wire the funds without it. Which means he will not wire the funds at all. Which means you will be filing the Sotheby's RM rescission paperwork on December 19th at the latest, and your private sale ledger for the 4th quarter of 2026 will close with a $4.2 million acquisition. You cannot recover from the original seller because the Swiss workshop has been bankrupt since 2004. I have not been preparing only for this conversation, Mr. Castellano. I have been preparing for all of the conversations that follow it. Vincent Castellano looked at Marcus Reyes for a long moment. He turned. He walked out of the office. The 2 halcyon publicists and Marcus Pemberton followed him. The Rolls-Royce Cullinan and the BMW X7 and the Ford F-450 with the trailer all started their engines and pulled out of the parking lot in formation. They turned east on Calle Ocho toward Brickell. The office was silent. Diego walked around the desk. He stood in front of his father. He looked at Marcus with an expression that Marcus had not seen on his son's face since the funeral. Papa, Diego, Abuela's notes were always going to be enough, weren't they? They were. Papa. Tell me what we do now. Marcus Reyes did not call anyone for the rest of Friday afternoon. He sent Miguel home at 3 o'clock. He drove Diego back to the small house on Coral Way at 4:30. He sat with Diego at the kitchen table while Diego ate a small bowl of moros y cristianos that Tia Carmen had brought over earlier in the week. He did not, at any point during dinner, discuss the events of the morning. He did not, after dinner, take out his cell phone. He sat in the small porch swing on the front of the house from approximately 7 in the evening until approximately 10 at night, watching the headlights pass on Coral Way and waiting. He was waiting, although Diego did not know it, and although Marcus had not explicitly framed it to himself in these terms, for Roberto Castellati. Roberto Castellati was 76 years old. He had been the regional distributor for Lamborghini in the southeastern United States from 1985 through 2008, when his territory had been absorbed into the centralized Lamborghini North America distribution model, and his contract had been bought out for an amount that had allowed him to retire to a small Mediterranean revival home in Coral Gables, 4 blocks south of the University of Miami campus, with his wife of 51 years and a small collection of 7 classic Lamborghinis that he restored as a personal hobby. One of the 7 Lamborghinis was a 1971 Miura P400 in Verde Miura that he had purchased in 1991 from a Mexican collector, and that had been severely damaged by saltwater during Hurricane Andrew in August of 1992. Hernán Reyes had restored the wiring harness, the upholstery, and the lower body panels over the subsequent 14 months, working 72-hour weeks during the worst months of the restoration. And Roberto Castellati had, for the subsequent 34 years, regarded Hernán Reyes as one of the 3 people in Greater Miami to whom he believed he owed a personal debt that had never been adequately repaid. Roberto had attended Hernán's funeral in October of 2019. He had embraced Marcus at the funeral and had told him, in a brief and emotional exchange that Marcus had not, at the time, fully understood, that if there was ever anything Marcus needed regarding any classic Lamborghini matter, Roberto's phone number had not changed since 1987 and would not change before Roberto died. Roberto called Marcus at 10:38 on Friday night. Marcus, Roberto, I had coffee this afternoon with a friend at the Historic Preservation Board. He mentioned that you had been visited by Vincent Castellano. He mentioned that Castellano had brought a Miura that had been described to my friend before the visit as the missing 1971 SVJ. Is this correct? Yes. And is the vehicle the missing 1971 SVJ? No, Roberto, it is not. It is a P400 from 1969 that was modified by a Swiss workshop in approximately 1995. The chassis number has been ground and re-stamped. The engine identification plate has been replaced. The body has been resprayed 3 times. I have already informed Castellano. He has left my garage. The Saudi buyer in Riyadh will not wire the funds, Madonna Mia? Yes. May I drive to Calle Ocho tomorrow morning? I would like to see the vehicle before Castellano arranges to remove it. He has not arranged to remove it. He left it on the trailer in my parking lot when he left this afternoon. I do not believe he intends to come back for it. Then I will be there at 8 tomorrow morning. Bring coffee, Roberto. I am Italian. I always bring coffee. Roberto Castellotti arrived at Reyes Restoration at 8:12 in the morning on Saturday, November 15th, in a 1996 Mercedes-Benz S-Class that he had owned since the year it was sold, accompanied by his wife Sophia, who had brought a small ceramic dish of cannoli from a bakery on Coral Way, and by a small leather attaché case containing 3 things: a notarized statement of his 34-year history as a customer of Hernán Reyes, a printed copy of the Lamborghini Polo Storico Master Registry's last public update on the 1971 Miura SVJ production line, and the personal cell phone number of Stefan Winkelmann, the chief executive officer of Automobili Lamborghini S.p.A. Roberto spent 2 hours and 40 minutes inspecting the vehicle, with Marcus and Diego and Miguel and Sofia and Tia Carmen, who had walked over from her apartment at 9, all present. He confirmed Marcus's findings. He took 12 additional photographs. He took 2 telephone calls, both in Italian, the second of which lasted 19 minutes. At approximately 10:45, he sat down at the desk in the back office and dialed Stefan Winkelmann's personal cell phone number from his own cell phone in Marcus's presence. The call went through on the second ring. The conversation was in Italian. It lasted 23 minutes. Roberto was crying audibly during the final 2 minutes of the call. Sophia had set down her cannoli and had walked into the office and had placed her left hand on her husband's right shoulder. Tia Carmen had set down her Café Cubano and had crossed herself. Roberto Castellotti hung up the phone. He looked at Marcus. Stefan is dispatching 2 historians from Lamborghini Polo Storico. They will arrive in Miami on Wednesday. They will conduct an independent confirmation of your findings. If the confirmation matches your assessment, which it will, Lamborghini Automobili S.p.A. will issue a public statement on December 11th disavowing the Castellano vehicle as a counterfeit. The Sotheby's RM Monterey auction house will be notified on December 12th and will be requested to initiate a full forensic review of all classic Lamborghini lots they have sold since 2020. Vincent Castellano will be notified through Lamborghini Polo Storico's legal counsel on December 13th. He will not, after December 13th, be in a position to sell the vehicle at the figure he has been quoting. He paused. Marcus, your father did not believe the missing 1971 Miura SVJ would ever be found. He told me this in 1993, in your garage when he was painting the new doors on my Miura P400. He told me that some things were missing because the world had decided they were better off missing. He was a wise man, your father. He was wiser than the people who hired him. He was wiser than the people who refused to hire him. He was wiser than me. I have spent 34 years learning what he meant. I think you have learned it faster. Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked at the framed photograph of his father on the wall above the desk. Hernán in his Miami-Dade Police Department uniform in 1965, 22 years old, 3 years off the boat from Cuba, hair already going prematurely silver. He looked back at Roberto. Roberto, I have one more thing to ask of you. Anything, Marcus. I want to meet with your wife privately tomorrow afternoon. There is a question I need to ask Sophia about my mother-in-law, Carmen Reyes, the one who testified against me in 2018. Roberto looked at Sophia, who looked at Marcus, and who, after a moment, nodded. Of course, Marcus. Sophia will come to your house on Coral Way tomorrow at 3. Bring your Café Cubano. Sophia will tell you what she knows. There are things Italian wives have always known about Cuban wives in Coral Gables. There are things she has been waiting for the right moment to tell you. The 2 historians from Lamborghini Polo Storico arrived in Miami on Wednesday, November 19th, in a rented gray Mercedes-Benz E-Class from the Miami International Airport rental concourse. They were Dr. Stefano Marchetti, 62 years old, the senior authentication specialist at Lamborghini Polo Storico for the Miura production run, and Dr. Caterina Bellini, 47 years old, the senior metallurgical analyst for the Sant'Agata Bolognese Heritage Division. They worked at Reyes Restoration for 3 days. They took 114 photographs. They took 9 spectrometer readings on equipment they had brought with them from Sant'Agata Bolognese. They took oral histories from Marcus, from Diego, from Miguel, from Roberto, from Tia Carmen, and from Hernán Reyes's archive box, which they photographed page by page. On Friday, November 21st, they concluded their on-site work. On Wednesday, November 26th, they filed their internal report with the Polo Storico director in Sant'Agata Bolognese. On Tuesday, December 2nd, the report was forwarded to Lamborghini Automobili SPA's legal department in Milan. On Friday, December 5th, the legal department recommended public disclosure. On Tuesday, December 9th, the Lamborghini Automobili SPA Board of Directors approved the public disclosure. On Thursday, December 11th at 7 o'clock in the morning Italian time, Lamborghini Automobili SPA issued a public statement disavowing the Castellano Miura as a counterfeit and naming the Swiss workshop responsible for the modification. The Miami Herald front page coverage on Friday, December 12th, was written by a reporter named Hannah Brennan of the Wall Street Journal's Miami bureau, who had been covering automotive industry corruption matters as a primary beat since 2017, and who had become, since her coverage of the Mitsushima case in Torrance, California in the spring of 2027, and the Cromwell Performance Group case in Duluth, Minnesota in the late spring of the same year, one of the 3 reporters in the United States most knowledgeable about classic and modern automotive fraud. The story was 6,800 words long. It included a sidebar interview with Roberto Castellotti. It included a photograph, taken by Hannah's photographer David Ortiz on the morning of December 10th, of Marcus Reyes standing in Bay 1 of Reyes Restoration, holding Hernán's spiral-bound notebook open to page 43, with the Castellano Miura visible in the background. The Miami-Dade County Historic Preservation Board voted on the Calle Ocho Tower variance request on December 15th. The vote was 9-1 against. The single yes vote was cast by a board member named Eleanor Castellano, who was Vincent Castellano's first cousin once removed, and whose appointment to the board in 2023 had, in the wake of the Hannah Brennan article, become a matter of active investigation by the Miami-Dade County Office of Inspector General. Diego Reyes received his Florida International University early action acceptance on December 18th at 3:42 in the afternoon. The notification was delivered by email to Diego's account and by automated phone call to the small house on Coral Way. Diego received the news at the kitchen table, while eating a slice of guava and cheese pastelito that Tia Carmen had brought over earlier in the week. He did not tell his father immediately. He walked to the back office of Reyes Restoration with the FIU's acceptance letter printed on plain white paper, set it on the desk in front of Marcus, and stood there until his father had finished reading it. Marcus Reyes did not cry. He had not, in the 7 years and 1 month since his father had died, cried in front of his son. He stood up slowly, walked around the desk, and embraced Diego for 47 seconds. Diego cried. Marcus did not. Joey Castellano resigned from the FIU Undergraduate Admissions Committee on December 22nd. The resignation letter, which was leaked to the Miami Herald the following Monday, cited personal family matters affecting impartial committee service. Joey Castellano was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Southern District of Florida on April 14, 2027, for conspiracy to commit honest services fraud. He entered a plea of guilty on June 2nd in exchange for a sentence of 36 months in federal minimum security and his cooperation against his uncle Vincent. Vincent Castellano was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Southern District of Florida on April 18, 2027, on charges that included racketeering, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to commit honest services fraud, and violations of the Federal Auto Parts Fraud Prevention Act. The indictment cited the Lamborghini Miura matter as a predicate act. The Florida Attorney General's office, under Attorney General Sandra Ortiz of Coral Gables, filed parallel state racketeering charges on April 22nd. Vincent Castellano entered a plea of guilty on August 4th in exchange for a sentence of 71 months in a federal minimum security facility in Pensacola, Florida. He began serving his sentence on October 17, 2027. Castellano Properties filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on June 12th. The filing was converted to Chapter 7 liquidation on September 2nd. The civil settlements followed. Lamborghini Automobili SPA paid Marcus Reyes a class action restitution participation fee of $1,200,000 for his role as the originating expert witness in the Polo Storico investigation. Sotheby's RM Auctions paid Marcus a consulting fee of $180,000. The Florida Attorney General's office paid Marcus a witness compensation fee of $80,000. The federal racketeering forfeiture distribution, which was divided among Marcus and 12 other Little Havana property owners whose buildings Vincent Castellano had targeted through shell entities, paid Marcus $1,800,000. The Castellano Properties bankruptcy creditor settlement, in which Marcus was a Class B creditor in his capacity as the lessee of his garage building, which Vincent had purchased through a shell entity in 2024 and had attempted to evict him from in 2025, paid Marcus $2,400,000. The civil lawsuit Marcus filed against Vincent Castellano personally for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation related to the December 12 Miami Herald article and the subsequent press coverage settled in mediation on October 3 for $1,200,000. The total recovery before taxes was $6,860,000. Marcus declined every major media interview request. He gave one interview to a Cuban-American community newspaper called El Nuevo Herald, which had covered Hernán Reyes's funeral in 2019 and which had run a feature on Marcus's mother's funeral in 2004. The article ran in the November 15, 2027 issue. It was 1,100 words long. The headline in both Spanish and English was El hijo de Hernán salva el Little Havana. Hernán's son saves Little Havana. The photograph was of Marcus, Diego, Roberto Castellotti, and Tia Carmen standing in front of the framed photograph of Hernán Reyes in his Miami-Dade Police Department uniform. Roberto Castellotti clipped both the Miami Herald article and the El Nuevo Herald article and laminated them. He hung them on the wall of his Coral Gables home, beside the photograph of Hernán Reyes that had stood on the dashboard of Roberto's Miura P400 since the morning Roberto had picked up the restored vehicle in March of 1993. Lamborghini Polo Storgico extended a formal invitation to Marcus Reyes on November 23 to serve on the judging panel of the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegances for the August 2028 event. Marcus would be the first Cuban-American Lamborghini specialist in the history of the Concours d'Elegance to receive such an invitation. He accepted on November 25. On the Sunday morning of September 5, 2027, 2 weeks after Diego Reyes had moved into his FU dormitory in University Park, and 3 weeks before Vincent Castellano was scheduled to begin his federal sentence. In Pensacola, Marcus Reyes was sitting on the front porch of the small house on Coral Way drinking his second cortadito of the morning when his mother-in-law Carmen Reyes walked up to the porch steps and asked, in Spanish, if she could speak with him. She was 76 years old. She had not been to the house on Coral Way since the morning of Esperanza's funeral in May of 2018. She was wearing a dark blue dress with white piping that Marcus recognized as the same dress she had worn to the funeral. She was carrying a small paper grocery bag from a Sedano's market. She was crying. The conversation Sofia Castellotti had told Marcus to prepare for on the afternoon of Sunday, November 16, 2026, in which Sofia had explained that Carmen Reyes had testified against Marcus in the 2018 custody proceedings, not because Carmen had believed the testimony, but because a man named Bruno Fontana, who had been Salvatore Castellano's enforcer in the 1970s, and who had retired to Hialeah in the 1990s, and who had been collecting protection payments from Cuban-American families in Hialeah throughout the period from 1990 through approximately 2015, had quietly arranged through intermediaries for Carmen's care home payments to be covered in exchange for her cooperation, which Carmen had agreed to because Bruno had threatened Tia Carmen and Diego in vague and unspecified ways, and Carmen had been afraid. That conversation, which Marcus had been carrying in his head for 10 months, was about to occur. Marcus set down his cortadito. Suegra, please sit down. Carmen sat in the small wooden chair across from Marcus. The Sedano's bag contained, Marcus could see through the thin paper, 2 small mangoes and a single guava pastelito. Offering, she spoke in Spanish. Marcus would later translate the conversation for Diego on the drive to FU on Saturday morning. Marcus. The care home payments stopped on July 1st. Bruno Fontana died in February. His son sold the house in Hialeah. The estate fund my husband Tomas had set up for me when he died in 2010 ran out in 2015. The payments that came after that, they came from Bruno. I did not know that until July when they stopped. I called the care home and they told me, I am sorry, Marcus. I am sorry for what I did in 2018. I lied to the lawyers about Esperanza. I lied to the lawyers about you. I lied because Bruno told me he would hurt Diego and Tia Carmen if I did not, and the care home payments were how he made me believe him. I have been ashamed for 9 years. I did not know how to come back. I do not have anywhere to go, Marcus. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am so sorry, she cried. Marcus did not respond for several minutes. He looked at his mother-in-law. He thought about Esperanza, who had been Carmen's daughter, and who had loved Carmen even when Carmen had been a difficult mother. He thought about Diego, who had been 7 years old when his grandmother had testified against his father, and who had not spoken to his grandmother in 9 years. He thought about Hernán, who had said to Marcus on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2010 when Carmen had been visiting Esperanza in the early days of her pregnancy with Diego, "Some women are made hard by life, Marcus. We do not love them less for what life has made of them. We love them more because we understand what it cost." He stood up. He walked into the house. He came back with a small ceramic Café Cubano cup and a small espresso machine. He poured Carmen a coffee. He spoke in Spanish. "Tomé el café. Y luego entras a la casa. Diego va a llegar esta tarde a las 5. Va a querer hablar contigo. Tía Carmen va a venir a las 6. Vamos a comer ropa vieja a las 7. No vamos a hablar de 2018. Vamos a hablar de Esperanza. Vamos a hablar de tu nieto. Vamos a empezar de nuevo, mother-in-law. Drink the coffee, and then come into the house. Diego will arrive this afternoon at 5. He will want to speak with you. Tía Carmen will come at 6. We will eat ropa vieja at 7. We will not speak of 2018. We will speak of Esperanza. We will speak of your grandson. We will begin again." Carmen drank the coffee. She walked into the house. Marcus carried her small paper bag from Sedano's. He set the mangoes on the kitchen counter. He set the guava pastelito on a small plate. He cut it into 4 pieces. He waited. Diego arrived at 5:07, having driven the 23 minutes from FU University Park in the small white Honda Civic that Marcus had bought him for his 16th birthday 2 years earlier. He walked into the house, set down his backpack, saw his grandmother sitting on the small couch in the living room, and stopped. He looked at his father. Marcus nodded once. Diego walked across the living room and sat down beside his grandmother on the couch. He did not speak. After approximately 90 seconds, Carmen took Diego's right hand in her left hand. Diego did not pull away. They sat together on the couch for 43 minutes without speaking. Marcus made more coffee. Tia Carmen arrived at 6:03, having walked from her apartment 4 blocks away, having seen Carmen Reyes through the front window from the sidewalk, having understood immediately what was happening, and having decided, in the space of approximately 3 seconds, that this was the kind of family reconciliation she had been praying for at St. Michael the Archangel Parish since the morning of Esperanza's funeral 9 years earlier. The 4 of them ate ropa vieja at 7:15. Marcus lit a small votive candle on the small kitchen counter beside the framed photograph of Esperanza Reyes before they began to eat. He crossed himself. He said in Spanish in the voice he used in the early mornings at the garage before opening, "Esperanza. Tu hijo está en la universidad, tu madre está en casa, todos estamos aquí, te extrañamos cada día. Your son is at university, your mother is home, we are all here. We miss you every day." He sat down at the head of the small dining table. Carmen sat at the foot of the table where Esperanza had sat for 14 years. Diego sat to Marcus's right. Tia Carmen sat to Marcus's left. They ate ropa vieja and black beans and rice and fried plantains and a small avocado salad that Tia Carmen had brought from her apartment. They drank Café Cubano. They did not speak about Vincent Castellano. They did not speak about the variance vote. They did not speak about Lamborghini Polo Storico. They did not speak about Pebble Beach. They spoke about Diego's roommate at FU. They spoke about Tia Carmen's church choir. They spoke about a small Cuban bakery on 27th Avenue that had reopened the previous month after a renovation. They spoke about Hurricane Beatrice, which was projected to pass 200 miles north of Miami on Wednesday, but which Tia Carmen, who had survived Hurricane Andrew and Wilma and Irma and Maria, was preparing for as though it would pass directly over Coral Way. After dinner, Carmen helped Tia Carmen with the dishes. Diego went to his old bedroom, which Marcus had not changed since Diego had left for FIU 2 weeks earlier, and he came back with a small framed photograph of Esperanza Reyes holding the infant Diego at Crandon Park in 2010, which he gave to his grandmother. Carmen cried again. She did not let go of the photograph for the rest of the evening. Tia Carmen drove Carmen Reyes to the small spare bedroom Marcus had prepared on Friday afternoon. Carmen would live there. Marcus had decided 2 weeks earlier, when Sofia Castellotti had told him on the phone that the Bruno Fontana payments had stopped. Marcus had not told Carmen the room was prepared. He had simply waited for her to walk up to the porch. Diego left for FU at 9:45. He embraced his grandmother before he left. He told her, in Spanish, that he would be home next Saturday for lunch. Carmen wept on the porch as Diego pulled out of the driveway. Tia Carmen held her hand. Marcus stood at the front door and watched. He had been a man who, on the morning of May 14, 2018, had come home from Lamborghini Miami at 6:15 in the evening and had found his 8-year-old son sitting on the floor of the small back bedroom, holding his dead wife's left hand. He had been a man who had spent the subsequent 9 years carrying that morning inside of him in the way that he carried his car keys and his wallet, and in the small votive candle he lit every morning beside the espresso machine. He had also been, he understood now, a man who had been carrying his mother-in-law's 9-year-old shame inside of him in a way that he had not, until that morning, fully recognized. He had been wrong about her. He had been wrong about himself. Marcus Reyes was a Cuban-American mechanic on Calle Ocho in Little Havana. He had been a headmaster technician at Lamborghini Miami. He was the father of a 17-year-old engineering student at FU. He was the son of a Cuban exile police detective who had restored Lamborghini Miuras for 54 years and had kept records of every restoration in a locked cabinet. He was the widower of a registered nurse who had loved him for 14 years and who had died on a Wednesday morning in May of 2018 of an accidental overdose of medication prescribed for her broken back. He was, as of the Sunday evening of September 5, 2027, also the son-in-law of a 76-year-old woman who had testified against him in 2018, who had spent 9 years carrying a shame she had not believed she could set down, and who was now sleeping in the small spare bedroom at the back of the house on Coral Way. He sat in the small porch swing. The September air smelled of the gardenias Esperanza had planted in 2012 and that he had continued to tend in the 9 years since her death. He was, for the first time in 112 months, no longer afraid. He was still here. He was still listening. He was still telling the truth.